Lil Durk still remains in a federal detention center in Los Angeles since his arrest in October. Now, his defense team is hoping to have the case dismissed altogether, or at the bare minimum, at least be able to get their client out of federal lockup pending trial. And the defense is slamming federal prosecutors, claiming they misled the grand jury by presenting what the defense calls false evidence in the rapper's murder-for-hire case. I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. So what is the false evidence the defense is talking about? Well, they claim it's song lyrics the government painted to the grand jury as Lil Durk celebrating and profiting off a revenge murder he allegedly ordered. However, the defense says that's not true at all, claiming artists shouldn't be criminalized for lyrical creativity, especially when the song was written months before the murder. Lil Durk faces multiple charges, including conspiracy, use of interstate facilities to commit murder for hire resulting in death, using, carrying, and discharging firearms and machine guns, and possession of such firearms in furtherance of a crime of violence resulting in death. Plus now another charge, according to federal prosecutors. But more on that in a bit. So the arrest came down in late October. In late November, his superseding indictment came down, and by December, he was denied bond after pleading not guilty to his charges. Now, Lil Durk has maintained his innocence, and the defense hopes a federal judge will reconsider the detention order. In an April motion to dismiss Durk's superseding indictment, the rapper's defense team says, quote, "The government presented false evidence to the grand jury that indicted Mr. Banks on November 7, 2024. The plain language of the superseding indictment makes it apparent that the government told the grand jury that Mr. Banks, through specific lyrics in his music, celebrated and profited from a revenge murder that he ordered, namely that of SR in August of 2022. That claim is demonstrably false." So as many rap fans already know, federal prosecutors allege Lil Durk ordered a hit out on rapper Quando Rondo in retaliation for his alleged involvement in Lil Durk's close friend King Von's murder. Now, King Von was shot and killed in 2020 in Atlanta, Georgia. Prosecutors claim Lil Durk ordered a hit on Quando. However, it was Quando's cousin that was killed in the ambush-style shooting in LA in 2022. And again, Lil Durk isn't accused of pulling the trigger or actually carrying out the murder. He's accused of orchestrating it. But either way, he still faces what could be a life sentence if he's convicted on these charges. Now, the defense claims when prosecutors brought the case to a grand jury, they relied on evidence from Lil Durk's Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy song.
Look on the news and see your son, you screaming, no, no. And all the hanging with him, if you know, you know.
So here's the thing. The defense claims the song was actually recorded by another artist, Babyface Ray, and Lil Durk was just a feature on the song. So he couldn't have commercialized off the alleged murder for hire of Quando Rondo's cousin. But the defense says the government painted it out that way to a grand jury. Plus, and likely the most important part, is that Lil Durk recorded those lyrics 7 months before Quando's cousin was killed. So Lil Durk recorded his portion in January of 2022. Quando Rondo and his cousin were shot at in August of that same year. But the defense says after the song was recorded back in January, Lil Durk no longer had involvement on the song. All other production on it was done by producers and other industry professionals. But there were no changes to lyrics made by Lil Durk, and all of this information was available to the government. So now the defense is pushing for the courts to dismiss the superseding indictment against Lil Durk. The defense wrote in their motion, quote, "The issue over timing of Mr. Banks' recording of the lyrical verse in question is not one of frivolous or inconsequential value. It is quite the opposite. The government's misrepresentation about the creation and meaning of Wonderful Wayne are the linchpin of the superseding indictment's theory of Mr. Banks' guilt. Indeed, the superseding indictment features it prominently." And according to the superseding indictment, federal prosecutors wrote, quote, "Following the attempted murder of TB and the murder of SR, defendant Banks sought to commercialize SR's death by rapping about his revenge on TB with music that explicitly references audio from a news clip taken shortly after SR's murder where TB screamed no, no after seeing SR's dead body." Now, the defense wrote in response to that line, quote, "It is in fact the only material allegation that does not appear in the original indictment, which does not charge Mr. Banks, but appears in the superseding indictment, which does charge him." The defense argues the superseding indictment isn't sustainable against Lil Durk in the face of fundamental factual error that the grand jury relied on, and the defense wants a dismissal of the indictment, writing, quote, "A prosecutor who knowingly secures an indictment based upon false information or who allows a falsely obtained indictment to persist routs the grand jury from its central protective function. That is clearly what happened here. For the foregoing reasons, the court should dismiss the superseding indictment against Mr. Banks. In the alternative, the court should compel disclosure of the relevant underlying grand jury proceedings. Durk's family also released a statement echoing the defense's motion, writing, "The recent developments in Durk's legal case have brought a harsh truth to light. The government presented false evidence to a grand jury to indict him. This isn't justice. That's a violation of the very system that's supposed to protect all of us." Durk has always used music to tell stories, to express pain, to heal, and yet those same lyrics are now being used against him. We refuse to stay silent as Black artists continue to be criminalized for their creativity. Rap is art. As a family, we are asking the public, the fans, and the culture to stand with us. Stand for truth, stand for fairness, stand for the voice. So what was the government's response? Well, they claimed the timing of when he recorded the song and the fan-made videos overlapping the news clip about Quando's cousin's death is neither new nor does it have a material bearing on the court's detention analysis. Federal prosecutors write, quote, "Tellingly, defendant's application does not even reference the court's analysis on danger or flight. It does not explain how defendant's lyrics or fan-made videos undermine the inference that defendant, who has considerable resources, attempted to leave the United States upon learning of the arrest of his co-conspirators, or that defendant uses his money, influence, and power to endanger individuals whom he perceives as a threat." At the hearing, defense counsel raised this exact issue of timing of defendant's lyrics. The court made clear that the lyrics were not material to its detention analysis. The filing goes on to say, moreover, defendant's proffer that his fans, rather than defendant himself, created the videos linking him to SR's murder is immaterial to defendant's danger or flight. Defendant was not detained because of videos his fans created. He was detained because he is alleged to be the leader of a violent organization, because he orchestrated and funded an execution-style murder with machine guns at a busy gas station, and because he tried to flee the country after his co-conspirators were arrested. But even if the lyrics or videos had some bearing on the detention analysis, they corroborate defendant's danger. Defendant has repeatedly used his pulpit as a voice of violence, publicly rapped about paying for murders, hunting opponents with machine guns, bounty hunters in Beverly Hills, and other lyrics that have a striking similarity to the modus operandi used to kill SR. Federal prosecutors list other songs where they claim Lil Durk was rapping about the murder, like Gucci Mane's song Rumors, where Lil Durk had a feature, and Scoom His, which was an unreleased song seized by the feds. So because of Lil Durk allegedly trying to flee, because remember, his arrest happened at a Miami airport, the FBI said Lil Durk at the time booked at least 3 international flights following the arrest of his now co-defendants. U.S. Customs and Border Protection alerted the FBI he booked 2 one-way flights to Dubai and Switzerland, but also booked a private plane to leave Miami and arrive in Italy. However, he was arrested prior to takeoff. So for all of those reasons, federal prosecutors want the court to keep Lil Durk where he is, in federal detention pending trial. Then on May 1st, prosecutors say the grand jury returned a second superseding indictment, charging the Chicago rapper and his co-defendants with crimes arising from the August 2022 murder of SR, including an additional charge of stalking resulting in death. In the court filing, prosecutors write, quote, "Defendant Banks has presented a false narrative that he is being prosecuted and detained because of his violent lyrics. This claim is and has always been baseless." Prosecutors say the second superseding indictment contains no allegations about defendant's lyrics. Instead, it contains significant allegations that show Durk's alleged role in the execution-style murder of Quando's cousin. So with the second superseding indictment coming down, quite frankly, it's just not looking too good. But it'll be up to a judge to decide. Durk has a court hearing set for next week. This Lil Durk case has so many layers. The defense claims it's the lyrics that helped get Lil Durk indicted. Federal prosecutors say it was Lil Durk's alleged actions, that being the reason. So let's bring on now a great guest, and that's civil rights and trial attorney Adante Pointer. Adante, great to have you on. What's your reaction to the defense and even Lil Durk's family claiming that his lyrics are being used against him?
Well, this is a common refrain, or I should say response, to these type of allegations wherein artists, be it a rapper or be it whoever, their artwork is being used against them to say they engaged in criminal conduct. We do have freedom of speech in this country, although there are some limits to it. And anything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law. And this is one of those cases that tees that up perfectly.
And so prosecutors, they say that the lyrics were an issue that was brought up at his original detention hearing, and they have nothing to do with why the judge made that ruling to keep him locked up pending trial. And while the defense points specifically to his feature on Wonderful Wayne and Jackie Boy, the Fed seized another song that references riding through Beverly Hills with choppers, all this other stuff. What's your reaction to those specific songs being called out in the government's response?
Well, the government is saying, look, These lyrics and your rap songs or rap verses are too eerily, coinkydingly similar to what happened in real life. So, is this a situation where art mirrors life, or is life mirroring art? The government is saying your art is mirroring your real life, which is a criminal life. Little Dirk is simply saying, look, these are lyrics. It's art. If it so happens to generally fit something that really took place in life, that doesn't mean I'm the person or the culprit that did it. And this is going to be the tug of war, essentially the issue that'll be filed out throughout this case.
And it's interesting that they point to specifically the Jackie Boy song, mainly because that was recorded 7 months before the murder even happened. What's your reaction to just that this song was recorded months prior to the murder, and yet it was specifically pointed out by federal prosecutors in their first superseding indictment? We'll talk about the second one in just a sec.
I was a bit shocked to find out that the song that the government has essentially rested its foundation upon, as it relates to the criminal prosecution of Little Dirk, is a song that was recorded several months, I believe 7 to 8 months prior to the actual shooting and killing. So, what you have here is the government trying to say, look, you made these lyrics, and these lyrics indicate to us that you're responsible for the shooting, or at least you played a role in it. But Little Dirk is saying the song came out so far in advance of the actual shooting. I didn't have anything to do with that. It just so happens, once again, a coincidence that these lyrics generally fit what wound up taking place in the future. Of course, the government's response to that is maybe you're just rapping about something that you were intended to do before you actually did it.
And what do you think that message kind of sends to other rappers? You know, we've seen this in other cases as well too, with Young Thug. Now we have Lil Durk and just other rappers who, do have criminal charges brought against them. But it does seem like, federal authorities, especially in this case, they go to podcast interviews, they go to lyrics of songs and use that as evidence against these rappers. But in terms of, freedom of speech and freedom of expression, what does that say to rappers who, to their point, in rap's defense, I should say, they are expressing a lyrical art form. They are talking about their lives. And maybe sometimes there are instances where they're, over embellishing, or maybe just kind of like chalking it up for more views, for more listeners to come in, that type of thing. But overall, what do you think that message sends to other rappers that, might get caught up in something like this and their art is used against them?
I think when you see these criminal prosecutions based upon an artist's rap lyrics, this is a bright, fat, flashing red flag, warning sign, turn around, go the other way. Because if this is simply their artwork and their art form, and they're engaging in freedom of speech, their creativity is not supposed to lead to seeing the inside of a courtroom, handcuffs, and potentially very long prison sentences. So I think that any rapper or any entertainer, period, any artist or creative, has to take note and have a really clear understanding that what they say may and will be used against them in a court of law, and will find them in a lot of hot water if it comes even close to mimicking something that's taken place in real life.
And a government filing came down on Friday, or today, I should say, that says Lil Durk is facing another charge of stalking. And this is coming after a grand jury handed down a second superseding indictment. Are you surprised there is a second superseding indictment? And what do you make of the stalking charge being added?
Well, it is in some ways it's surprising to see yet another superseding indictment come down. However, if you understand the way the government works, and particularly the federal government, they're not going to stop investigating, and they will essentially pile up all of these charges, roll them into one criminal prosecution, and force the defendant to fight their way out of it in defending against a myriad of charges, which makes it exponentially tougher for a defendant to actually get acquitted or declared innocent, because you have so many battles that you have to fight. You're almost overwhelmed. So while I'm sure Little Dirk was disappointed to hear about it, the question is that really a weak allegation that's being added? Or is it something that really does have a solid evidentiary foundation, and therefore he has to be concerned as it adding to whatever his criminal prosecution or sentence may be?
And we've seen it in other federal cases, to your point, including, Sean Diddy Combs, who had 3 superseding indictments, but now it seems like Lil Durk is almost there with now 2 superseding indictments. And the defense wrote in a court filing that the government provided a copy of the new indictment to undersigned counsel on today's date. And the second superseding indictment, the government has chosen to remove the allegations regarding Mr. Banks's lyrics previously included in the first superseding indictment and remove any allegation regarding the payment of a bounty previously included in the first superseding indictment as well too. What do you make of the defense's response there?
Well, I think the defense is doing its job. The defense is pointing out the way in which the indictments have changed or they've morphed over time. And typically, what you would expect is more factual allegations, more evidence, the inclusion of additional crimes. What you would not and do not expect is that the government, after the defense made an argument about that song predating the alleged criminal conduct, now, coincidentally or intentionally, I would say it's purposeful, the government now deleted or removed those allegations from the indictment. So that actually, to me, is a point scored, if you will, for Little Durk and a point taken away, if you will, from the government.
Because, yeah, it seems like at first they were doubling down, but now it seems like they're kind of reversing course and just taking it out altogether. In your opinion, do you think the judge will reconsider the detention order? And do you think it's possible at this stage with Lil Durk that he can actually get bail possibly?
I think the judge will take this into consideration, and I'd be surprised if Little Durk's counsel don't make another run at getting the bail reconsidered by the judge. This is certainly could be considered new evidence that the judge did not initially have to consider, especially when you're dealing with bail. The judge is looking at the allegations in the indictment, and if those allegations change or the evidentiary underpinnings of those allegations become weak or tenuous, then it's incumbent upon the judge to reevaluate whether or not this is a person, i.e., Little Durk, can be monitored and supervised outside of being placed in a jail cell while he's fighting his case. So I think could potentially be a game changer for Little Durk.
Now, prosecutors, on the other hand, they say that Lil Durk is a danger and a risk of flight. Now, the FBI said that he had booked 3 different flights in 3 different countries. Once he knew his co-conspirators were arrested, and Lil Durk, when he was arrested back in October, was arrested at a Miami airport. In terms of just risk or even risk of flight, do you think that the prosecution has a strong argument there?
Well, there's much ado made about these multiple flights that he had. I've seen it reported that, Little Durk had these different flights because he was trying to figure out how to get to his destination the most efficiently. Now, we don't know if that's true or not, but that was his claim. And I think anytime you're dealing with a high net worth individual, there is that a heightened risk that they can use their resources and their networks to flee the long arm of the law. However, for someone who's famous as he is, he's not someone like a Kanye or a Diddy that's, everyone kind of knows on sight. But I would think it would be pretty easy to keep tabs on someone such as Little Durk. So I think the government and the feds in particular, if they're inclined to want to allow him to be free while he fights this case, they certainly can come up with some accommodations to where they could keep a tab on him pretty easily.
Yeah, and I think the defense was even offering up like a $3 million bail package. So it seems like from the defense's angle that they really just kind of want their client to at least be able to fight his case from the outside. So we'll kind of see what happens. But in your opinion, there on the court's calendar, it's possible that Lil Durk will go on trial later this fall in October. But in your opinion, do you think federal prosecutors do actually have enough to convict Lil Durk? Now, they claim that they have phone records, credit card information, financial records that he allegedly paid the killers. What are your thoughts on just kind of the evidence the prosecution says that they have?
Well, the prosecution has certainly painted a strong case and a picture that seems to firmly place Little Durk in the center of the shooting. However, there are many examples of case falling apart on its way to trial, be it by witnesses, be it evidentiary evidence, or an investigation was compromised, and then that comes to the light. So while the allegations that the government are making are very serious, and it appears that they have done their homework, it doesn't mean that there weren't some missteps or overreach along the way. And those will be the issues that Little Durk's attorneys will be quick to point out and will use as a hammer, if you will, in order to try to loosen, or I should say, break the resolve of the government and going forward with these criminal charges.
And do you think it's possible that Lil Durk might have a mole in his camp? Do you think it's possible that there was someone along this way the entire time, possibly working as a cooperating witness with the federal government?
Do I think there was a cooperating witness or a mole? The answer would be yes, in caps, underscored, and bold. Because that is a very common and frequent tactic, in particular the federal government uses. They find someone that is next to or adjacent to the main target, and they find out that they've committed some type of crime and give them some sort of leniency in exchange for information or access to the main target. So it would actually be surprising to me if there was not a mole or some other confidential informant that was within Durk's camp feeding information to the federal government. Of course, that also opens up to the idea of credibility of this said witness or informant, because if their back was against the wall and they're facing 300 years, many people, unfortunately, despite what we might think, would be quick to tell and throw their friend under the bus. I remember once upon a time I was handling a case, and the defendant told me, hey, the police told me, why go to the pen being short for penitentiary, when you can send a friend? Why go to the pen when you can send a friend? And so people have all the incentive in the world to throw someone else under the bus in order to save themselves. And that's something that the defendant will certainly bring up.
Especially when you have, again, to your point, facing decades, hundreds of years possibly in a federal penitentiary versus what could be maybe a sweetheart deal in comparison. Yeah, I could see why maybe some people would decide to go that route. And as far as prosecutors, they allege that, the motive behind this was Lil Durk orchestrated this shooting in retaliation for King Von's death. They have Quando Rondo allegedly being associates with King Von's killer, that type of thing. But in terms of just the defense strategy, what do you think that could look like, especially as, to your point earlier, just the federal government, when they swing, they don't really miss, and they put a lot of stuff against you, and it can be pretty intimidating. But how do you think the defense could make a comeback?
Well, in a situation, most people who are going up against the federal government don't have the type of resources that a very well-selling and famous rapper might have at their beck and call. So I think Little Durk will put up a very vigorous defense. But as I used to say as an attorney, criminal defense attorney, I'm an attorney, I'm not a magician. So I can't make things appear and disappear. What I'm able to do is give different perspectives on items of evidence and or poke holes where there are some weakness in the government's case. And, the thing here is that they're able to show, by they, I mean the government, they're able to show that Little Durk had a motive for this shooting. But it's also still pretty tenuous because they don't have him there at the time of the shooting. They'd have to have more, which is what the government is alleging, documents, money, transferring hands, orders being given, congratulations being given out on the back end, or money being sent. There has to be some other corroborating evidence other than motive to put Little Durk in the penitentiary for this shooting and this death.
Yep, and to your point also, it's just the criminal defense attorney making those little holes that could be enough to sway at least maybe possibly one juror, maybe more. It's not out of the realm of possibility. We see it so many times here at Law&Crime. Adante Pointer, I want to thank you so much for your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, though, do you think that the judge will reconsider the detention order at next week's hearing?
I think it will. I think the judge will reconsider the detention order. The question is, I'm not sure if it'll be at next week's hearing. The judge may decide to do it on their own sua sponte, or they may wait for Little Durk's attorneys to file a formal motion. I'd imagine that motion is being feverishly typed up right now so that it could be in front of the judge by the time Little Durk winds up in court next week.
Yeah, but probably more court documents coming down bright and early Monday morning. I think they try to at least ask for a deadline between Tuesday, so we could see that filing coming down very, very soon. Adante Pointer, thank you so much again for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Always love being here. Thanks.
According to online records, Lil Durk has another court hearing set for Thursday, May 8th. But for now, he remains in federal custody at MDC Los Angeles. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.